Welcome, you're watching Race to Power with me, Ananya Datta. Let's start talking politics. Donald Trump is slowly telling us how he will reshape America in the next 4 years. After naming the first woman chief of staff, a man who is referred to as the father of family separation policy has been made the border czar. We tell you what comes next. Also, a lot is happening in Japan. In the last 50 days, Shigeru Ishiba took oath as the Prime Minister, then resigned from the post and has now again taken the seat. Only this time, the seat is on shaky grounds. Now, we heard the term border czar time and again on the US campaign trail. Donald Trump kept referring to Kamala Harris as one. 7 speakers at the Republican National Convention toed the same line, and interviewers held Harris responsible for the border crisis. All of this when Harris wasn't actually appointed the role. She was tasked to address the root causes of migration. Yes, the border comes in the purview of that, but officially the job still lied on the shoulders of Homeland Security. The reason we are telling you all of this tonight is because in the upcoming administration, that is Donald Trump's, there will be an official border czar. Trump has appointed Tom Homan for the role. In a post, the president-elect said, and I'm quoting, "There is nobody better at policing and controlling our borders. Tom will be in charge of all deportation of illegal aliens back to their country of origin." 62-year-old Homan is well versed with the immigration crisis as well as working with Trump. He started his career as a police officer with Border Patrol, then became a special agent with the former Immigration and Naturalization Service. Over the course of his long career, he managed to rise the ranks and ultimately become the deputy director. In 2017, Trump appointed him as the Director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Homan served for a year and a half before retiring. But during that time, the number of immigrants arrested soared by 40% compared to the year before that. Now, Homan is also an author of Project 2025. It is a presidential transition project in its own words that's drafted by many of Donald Trump's own aides, some of whom are expected to be part of his next presidency, like Homan. The Democrats have called the project an extremist vision of America. Trump has fully distanced himself away from the project. Now, to understand how the border policy will look like under Homan, we revisited some of his recent statements. During the 2024 Republican National Convention, he said, and I'm quoting, "I have a message for the millions of illegal aliens who Joe Biden allowed to enter the country in violation of federal law. Start packing because you are going home." During an interview for CBS News, he categorically said workplace enforcement operation will be necessary. We find a lot of trafficking cases where women and children perform forced labor to pay off smuggling fees. In the same interview, he shared his vision of immigration policy, where he said, and I'm quoting again, "If I'm in charge of illegal immigration, my priorities are public security threats and national security threats first." The interviewer asked if others can follow, to which he said, "Absolutely, it's a crime to enter any country illegally." Now, Trump has promised a zero-tolerance approach for the border. He has vowed to launch the largest deportation in American history, something Homan has gone on record to support. He's also promising to hire 10,000 Border Patrol agents and says that he will ask Congress to give all agents a 10% pay raise. All right, to get us some perspective on this story, Lincoln Mitchell is joining us on this broadcast from New York. Mr. Mitchell is a political analyst and a professor at Columbia University. Mr. Mitchell, thank you so much for joining us here on WION.
Thank you for having me back. Always good to chat with you.
Absolutely. Now, we haven't seen a concrete plan when it comes to the immigration and border policy under Donald Trump. However, there are some terms that are being thrown around by Donald Trump as well as his now border czar, who is Tom Homan. If I could quickly just go through them, they are promising that there will be a full investigation, there'll be quote-unquote targeted arrests, workplace enforcement is something that Homan has confirmed. Then someone threw around a term, massive air operations will take place. All of this, Trump claims, will lead to the largest deportation Americans have ever seen. Now, I want to ask you, if someone who is a tax-paying layman is watching all of this unfold, what does he understand? What should he expect?
Well, this is a big country, so what does somebody expect is a hard question. I think that there's a couple things here that are really notable. Workplace enforcement is something that a lot of Republican donors do not want. There are a lot of small, medium, and even large businesses that employ undocumented workers here because they are cheaper. Then you don't have to pay the benefits, they will work for less money. And a lot of small business people don't want ICE, Immigration Service, coming in and arresting people and then potentially fining them. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. I think to American ears, some of what Holman says sounds reasonable. I think most Americans, regardless of party, think that migrants who come in here and commit crimes should be kicked out of the country. Now, that's a very, very small number of people, and the Republicans have said it's a massive number, and they're being dishonest about that. Similarly, I think everyone in America would agree that someone here who is not here or even here legally, who is a threat to national security because maybe they're planning a terrorist attack or something, obviously they should be arrested or kicked out of the country or something like that. But that is the tiny tip of the giant iceberg. Most of the migrants here, other than the fact that they've entered without documents, are in fact law-abiding, and most of them are so afraid of authority that they're much more law-abiding than the average American citizen. The question here really is it was mass deportations, which is the buzzword we heard over and over again.
Right.
What does that look like? Because once you get past the easy people to deport, then you've kind of got to go house to house, business to business, and you've got to racially profile. And that would get very ugly and potentially very violent. And we will see if Trump has the wisdom not to actually pursue that policy. Just like ultimately he never really tried to build the wall, if mass deportations just recede back into a campaign slogan, that'd be the smart direction for Trump, but he's going to be in a lot of pressure to follow through on that promise.
Right, Mr. Mitchell, can we talk about the cost a little? Now, it was just last month that Tom Homan himself said that he's not aware that the plan has been written down yet. So everyone's coming up with their own estimate. One is quoting $88 billion, the other is $167 billion. There's another report saying $315 billion. Now, these are all yearly figures, but even if we pick the one that's $88 billion, the least of these three, even then, from a taxpayer's point of view, in an election where the people have voted on the lines of inflation, cost of living, and economy, when Donald Trump comes out and says just last week that no price is too high when it comes to mass deportation, how should a taxpayer view that?
Taxpayers should be concerned because the issue here is that it will balloon the federal debt. And that's something that most Republican presidents do. However, if you really want to get in the weeds on the policy side, whatever that number is, whether it's 1 or 200 billion, whatever that number is, much of that, and you said it in your introduction, is going to job creation, right? 10,000 border enforcement jobs. Those will go to overwhelmingly white people and overwhelmingly male. Some will be Latinos, but overwhelmingly men. And that's a huge part of Trump's constituency, right? Giving raises to people. So much of this is a way to funnel money to Trump's supporters, rather than to other causes that might help poor people or people of color or things like that. So it's going to cost a lot of money. Republican presidents tend to talk tough on the budget until they get in office. The deportation policy that they've talked about is terribly inflationary. If you want prices to go up in America, and that's not something I would like, but if that is your goal, the first way you do that is you get rid of the people who will work for the least money. And if you get rid of the migrant workforce, a lot of work in the United States either isn't going to get done or is going to cost more money, and that's going to be passed down to the average consumer. So there's a clash here between Trump's what people voted for on the economy, which clearly inflation was a very important part of that for many, many Americans.
Absolutely.
And the cultural issue of deportations.
All right, before I wrap up this discussion, there's this growing belief, especially among the Republicans, that if one sees consequences to illegal immigration, then people will stop knocking on your borders. Do you agree with that?
No. The push factors that are driving people to places like the United States. Now, in the Western Hemisphere, a lot of that is climate change, which we don't talk about, and actually from all over the world. They're not going away. The economic crises, the climate change crises that are pushing people out of countries where it's getting more and more difficult to make a living, to grow food, to do things like that, that's not going to change. So just kind of threatening and scaring a few people is not going to change the macro factors that are causing this.
All right, Mr. Mitchell, thank you so much for your interesting insights. Good to speak to you.
My pleasure, as always.
Now, Donald Trump is still over 2 months from officially assuming office as the 47th U.S. president, but the elected Republican is already making waves with his strategic moves just days after elections. Trump has asked his fellow Republican lawmakers to allow him to appoint key officials without a Senate confirmation vote. Now, the president-elect's demand is being seen as an attempt to subdue the remaining power vested with the Democrats after losing the presidential race and majority in the Senate. The Republicans are in the process of electing a new leader for the upper chamber of the Congress after winning majority in the Senate. However, their narrow majority still remains a key challenge to appoint new officials. And as per the U.S. Constitution, the Senate must vote to approve nominations made by the president for senior executive positions, such as cabinet posts and judicial appointments. However, this rule can be bypassed with the help of a constitutional clause, and that allows the president to appoint key officials if the chamber is in an extended recess. The catch here is that neither the Constitution nor the courts have defined the number of days that are considered a long enough recess. Talking to social media, Trump said that any Republican senator seeking leadership positions in the Senate must agree to recess appointments, expressing his dissatisfaction with the delay in appointments in his first term. Trump added that votes can take up 2 years and he can't let that happen again. Following the statement by Trump, the 3 Republican senators seeking to become leader in the chamber have issued statements in favor of recess appointments. Rick Scott, John Thune and John Cornyn are leading the race to replace Mitch McConnell. Trump has also called for the Senate to stop any pending judicial nominations by Democrat government. However, the president-elect has no control over this since Democrats remain in majority in the Senate as Joe Biden serves the remainder of his presidential term.
We cannot let that happen. To surrender to bullies, to bow down to dictators.
Now, our correspondent Susan Tehrani is joining us live from New York. Susan, good to see you. What's happening in the Senate?
Yeah, what the former president is proposing is not unprecedented. Alexander Hamilton, one of the founding fathers of the United States, said that, we have to have Senate approval in order to ensure that the president doesn't appoint someone that he only personally approves. But he also said that recent appointments have to take place because ultimately it will take too long for an appointment at one point or another that has to be urgent. Now, former President Donald Trump did not use this clause during his first term. Joe Biden didn't either, but Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, who was a Democrat, and George H.W. Bush, they all did. And this method has been used more than 100 times. So it's not really unheard of. I think what he's trying to prevent is those lengthy processes that often take time and are stonewalled for key appointments. But whether or not, he'll be able to go through with it, we'll have to wait and see. But it's not unprecedented and it's not unconstitutional either. It just hasn't been used as much.
All right, Susan, thank you so much for all those updates. Now, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has announced that he may call for a vote of confidence in Parliament before Christmas, a move that could lead to snap elections in Germany. The move comes after the recent collapse of his three-way government, after Scholz sacked his finance minister. Now, the decision comes amid growing calls for a quicker political resolution after the collapse of the coalition government. Scholz has initially suggested a vote of confidence on January 15th, with elections potentially taking place in the month of March. But as political tensions rise, the pressure for an early vote has increased. Key members of the Green Party, one of Scholz's coalition partners, publicly backed an early vote. They've argued that a confidence vote should be held in December rather than waiting until the new year. However, Scholz's position remains dependent on finding common ground with opposition leaders. Conservative leader Friedrich Merz, head of the CDU, has insisted on a January election. Responding to the Conservative Party leader, Scholz said that any decision on the timing will rely on reaching an agreement with Merz and the SPD's role of mute Zenit. Last week, Scholz called for a calm and reasoned debate on the future of the government, urging all factions to prioritize constructive dialogue over politics.
Chancellor of Germany.
Let's focus now. Japan's lawmakers have voted to keep Shigeru Ishiba as the country's prime minister. Now, Ishiba is expected to lead a minority government. Earlier, he and his cabinet had resigned ahead of the parliament vote after the ruling party had lost its parliamentary majority in last month's election. Ishiba was forced into a runoff with former Prime Minister Yoshihiko Noda, but emerged on top, winning 221 votes in the runoff. Noda, the leader of the main opposition Constitutional Democratic Party of Japan, also known as CDP, secured 160 votes. Now, this was the first such runoff between top two contenders for the post in 30 years. Ishiba's new cabinet is expected to announce soon, following by their appointment by the emperor. Now, Ishiba had called the snap polls after coming into office on October 1st. His Liberal Democratic Party and coalition partner Komeito won the biggest block of seats in the election while losing the majority held since 2012. The voters unhappy with inflation and a slush fund scandal that helped sink his predecessor Fumio Kishida delivered the party its worst result since 2009, which could cause political gridlock in a hung parliament. The small opposition Democratic Party for the People, that's DPP, has emerged as a kingmaker after the election. It was declined to enter formal coalition with the LDP, but may offer support on a policy-by-policy basis.
For people who believe that you need a decider and you need to be executing things and you have to be in charge, this is a disaster. There's no one who's going to be in charge. There's no one who could enforce her or his will. For those people who believe that Japan is more of a consensus-based, everyone, let's all get along. We have some things that we need to deal with. We can agree on almost everything. Let's do those things first kind of country. This is actually going to be a very interesting experiment in what is essentially a national unity government.
Shifting focus now, Sri Lankan President Kumara Dissanayaka has assured Tamils that their land occupied by the Sri Lankan government would be returned to them. Addressing a rally ahead of the November 14th parliamentary polls, Dissanayaka also took a firm stance against Indian fishermen quote-unquote illegally fishing in Sri Lankan waters. Now, this was Dissanayaka's first public meeting in Jaffna since coming to office in September. Tamils in Sri Lanka have been agitating to reclaim their lands that state agencies, including the archaeology and forest departments, have forcibly taken over. He said that Indian fishermen were destroying the marine sources that belong to the Tamil-populated northern regions of Sri Lanka, stating that his government will ensure that such exploitation of marine resources does not happen and will protect the rights of Sri Lankan fishermen. Our correspondent Asunia Thauda has sent this report from Colombo.
President Dissanayaka's promise of handing over land to its rightful owners in the north is not a new promise to those living in the north, especially after this promise was made on numerous occasions under various sitting presidents in the past. It will also be interesting to see, especially after parliamentary polls, what President Dissanayaka's government will intend to do with regard to these land matters, especially in the north. Reporting for WION World, it's one from Colombo, I'm Lasmia Thowder.
Over in Bangladesh, the party of former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has alleged that its activists were assaulted and not allowed to stage a rally in the capital city of Dhaka. Police arrested 10 protesters they described as quote-unquote conspirators and accused them of attempting to destabilize the country. Police said that supporters of Awami League were arrested after following the former Prime Minister's orders to protest bearing placards of Donald Trump. The police accused them of trying to undermine relations with Washington, D.C. The protests came ahead of a proposed rally by Hasina's Awami League, but the gathering was barred by the interim government, which calls the group fascist. The anti-discrimination student movement, who played a key role in toppling Hasina's government, held a large gathering in Dhaka protesting against the Awami League and Sheikh Hasina. As some pro-Hasina supporters took to the streets on Sunday, scuffles broke out with student counter-protesters. Police said that an audio recording of Hasina circulating across social media platforms had urged her supporters to protest on Sunday and to carry placards with Trump's photo and US flags. Police said that Awami League had not sought permission to hold a rally, while the press secretary to Yunus said that Hasina's party was not allowed to march. This as Bangladesh's interim government has announced it will seek Interpol assistance to track down fugitive leaders of Hasina's regime. The government is requesting a red notice for Hasina and other former officials accused of human rights abuses and crimes against humanity. Now, these charges stem from allegations of mass detentions, extrajudicial killings and crackdowns that resulted in over 700 deaths during the recent unrest. Sheikh Hasina, who fled to India, has been summoned to appear in court on November 18th, and warrants have been issued for over 60 individuals connected to her administration. Now, big news coming in from Haiti. The government's governing council has fired sitting Prime Minister Gary Conille. The Transitional Presidential Council said that it would replace the sacked Prime Minister with businessman Alex Didier. In a letter to the Haitian people, Conille said, and I'm quoting, that the decision to oust him was taken outside any legal and constitutional framework. 9-member Transitional Presidential Council that ousted him was established in April. This after Conille's predecessor was removed by a coalition of gangs that had taken over the capital. Council has been accused of indulging in politics and faces charges of corruption. Haiti's anti-corruption watchdog recommended charges against 3 members of the council, accusing them of seeking $750,000 in bribes from the director of the National Bank of Credit. Office of Presidency has been vacant in the country since the assassination of Jovenel Moïse in 2021. And with that, we are wrapping up this edition of Race to Power. Thanks for watching with me and Anya Datta. Goodbye.
The Earth is sending distress signals. Wildfires, droughts, and melting glaciers. Can we reverse the damage? Explore the harrowing effects of climate change. It's a wake-up call. Global emergency. Climate Tracker on WION World is One.
Congolese political and civil society leaders announced National Awakening Alliance to rally against constitutional changes that are meant to ensure President Felix Tshisekedi keeps power indefinitely, terming it high treason. Southern African development community scrambles for solutions to the crisis that is already having ripple effects on regional economies that rely on Mozambican ports for cargo movements. And in Ivory Coast, the popularity of leke sandals The plastic footwear, also known as jelly shoes or jellies, rises tremendously.